morning, everybody. I know we still have some people that are walking in, but we want to just welcome you to Fusion this morning. We're so glad for anybody that's here and joining us and anybody that's tuning in online. We just are happy to be with you, and will you worship with us this morning?
Well, good morning, Fusion. We're glad to have you joining us, whether you're here with us in person or whether you're joining us online. We got a few announcements for you this morning. First up, we have an app. I think we have an app. We have an app. I'm not sure if we're going to get the slide for it or not. But if you have not grabbed our app yet, we would love to have you do that. There it is. You can text Mitchell Fusion app to 77977. It'll give you the instructions to get that all downloaded. That's where you can stay up to date with everything that's happening at Fusion. You can do your giving, you can do your check-in cards, all that good stuff. Which leads us to our next point. we'd love to have you check in with us. Wherever you're at, we'd love to know where you are. This is a place where you can put prayer requests, or you can, if you want to talk to one of the pastors, you can put those requests in there. It's just helpful for us to know who's participating with us and kind of what's going on in their lives. So that's a good thing to do. We have fusion groups, I think. We've got that slide in there maybe. Fusion communities are happening right now. They're linking up with a sermon series. We've got a couple weeks left in those, so you could still join if you wanted. We've got them from Sunday morning and throughout the week. And then I think there's one last slide maybe. Yes, Financial Peace University is one of our fusion groups. This has been a ministry that has helped a lot of people help figure out their financial life. And so if that's an area where you want to grow, Financial Peace University would be something to check out. It started, I think, last week. They meet at 6 o'clock on Wednesdays via Zoom. So I think that's all we've got for today. Is there anything else? Nope, we're good. So that's the announcements for today. Wherever you are, we'd like to have you join us in worship. So adopt a posture that is conducive for you, whether that be standing, sitting, kneeling, as we continue to worship our God.
These pieces broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed but not forsaken. I've been set free, I've been set free. Oh, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I am found, was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down and raising up the broken to take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of clay. So take this heart, Lord, I'll be your vessel, the world to see your life in me. Oh, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I am found, was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. transition time as I go guitar to the microphone. So, a lot of the times when I go to pray, I have no words whatsoever. I have no idea what to pray. So I spend a lot of time going back to prayers that have been written either in Scripture or by someone else, and it just helps me find the words. So this morning's prayer is from our book of worship. This is a prayer for guidance. Eternal God, in whose appointment our life stands, and who committed our work to us, we commit our cares to you. We thank you that we are your children, and that you have assured us that while we are intent upon your will, you listen to our wants. Fill us with that compassion for others' troubles, which comes from forgetfulness of our own, with a love of those who know their own unworthiness, and with the glad hope of the children of eternity. And to you, the beginning and the end, Lord of the living, refuge of the dying, help of the troubled, to you be thanks and praise forever. Amen.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Taryn, and I'm one of the pastors here at Fusion. And we're going to have another little bit of an awkward transition while I get my stand set up here. But while I'm doing this, I have a little bit of a scenario for you all. So I want you to take a second and just kind of prepare yourselves to put yourself in this hypothetical scenario. And so I want you to think about a situation where you're having just a terrible, no good, very bad day. Maybe you're just having a little bit of an off day, you're feeling a little grumpy, or maybe your cat ran away, or your car broke down. But put yourself in that scenario, whatever it is that you're having a bad day, and you run into a neighbor or a classmate or a coworker. Of course it would happen on this bad day. And you get the classic, "Oh, how are you?" How do you respond? Take a moment, think about it, maybe talk to the person next to you. What's your go-to response in that scenario? I guess I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many of you would admit it to that person? You'd say, "I'm having a bad day." We got a couple people, okay. How many of you, on the other hand, would be a little more likely to give a good Midwestern response and say, "It could be worse," or "I'm doing okay"? Anyone relate to that? I see a couple hands, yeah. Personally, my favorite Midwestern response is, "I'm hanging in there." That's usually the response I give when I don't want to say that I'm having a really bad day. But I think we're not alone, because there's this meme that's been floating around on Twitter. I think we're going to put it on the screen here. Maybe. When Midwesterners say, it means. I feel like that's a little relatable. I feel like if something's really good, we say it's amazing or awesome or whatever, but we really just mean it's good. And by the time we get to not so great, we just really don't want to say it. So I think that this is relevant because we've all at some point told someone we're doing fine when we're really not. And part of that is using discretion and not airing our dirty laundry to the world. We've seen that go down on Facebook more than once, and it's not pretty. And so we use some discretion to not always air our dirty laundry or say what we're feeling exactly. But I think part of it is we feel uncomfortable talking about our struggles. We've accepted the narrative that it's not okay to not be okay. And so as we jump into week 5, we're in week 5 of our series, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and we're going to have to get a little bit uncomfortable because we're talking about kind of a heavy topic. We're talking about grief and loss. The title of this section is actually Enlarging Your Soul Through Grief and Loss, Embracing Our Limits. Woof, like that. That right there are three big words that are often taboo in our culture: loss, grief, and limits. But it's hard to deny that these three words, they're extremely relevant to today's world. You probably don't need reminding of the jobs lost, lives lost, limits imposed on travel and seeing loved ones, the new rules at schools and grocery stores, and that's not even the half of it. And so, especially in this season, it's important to talk about things like grief and loss and limits, even though it's uncomfortable. I'm guessing we've all had moments, I know I have, where we've tried different ways to cope with everything that's going on. Maybe you've rationalized it all out. Maybe you're blaming it on other things, like a political party. Or maybe you just want to tune it all out. You just can't stand talking about it anymore. But I'm here to tell you today that there is a different way. And we see this in the story that we're going to read in just a minute here of Jesus and his friend Lazarus. This is in John 11. It should be on the screen if you want to follow along. And it says, "A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, 'Lord, your dear friend is very sick.' When Jesus heard about this, he said, 'Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of the Lord, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this.' So although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, 'Let's go back to Judea.' But his disciples objected. 'Rabbi,' they said, 'only a few days ago the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going to go there again?' Jesus replied, 'There are 12 hours of daylight every day, and during the day people can walk safely. They can see because they have this light in the world. At night there is danger of stumbling because they have no light.' And he said, 'Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up.' The disciples said, 'Lord, if he is sleeping, he'll get better soon.' They thought Jesus meant that Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant Lazarus had died. So he told them plainly, 'Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him.' Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, 'Let's go too, and we'll die with Jesus.' When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Mary and Martha in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if only you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask.' Jesus told her, 'Your brother will rise again.' 'Yes,' Martha said, 'he will rise when everyone else rises in the last day.' A fair response. Jesus told her, 'I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die.' Do you believe this, Martha?" 'Yes, Lord,' she told him. 'I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God.' Then she returned to Mary, and she called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, 'The teacher is here and wants to see you.' So immediately Mary went to him. Jesus had stayed outside of the village in a place where Martha met him, and when the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep. So they followed her there. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, 'Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled within him. He was deeply troubled. 'Where have you put him?' he asked them. They told him, 'Lord, come and see.' Then Jesus wept. The people who were standing nearby said, 'See how much he loved him?' But some said, "This man healed a blind man. Couldn't he kept Lazarus from dying?" Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across the entrance. "Roll the stone aside," Jesus said. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, "Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible." Jesus responded, "Didn't I tell you that if you would see God's glory if you believe?" So they rolled the stone aside, and Jesus looked up into the heaven and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of these people standing here, so that they would believe you sent me." Then Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him go." This passage has the shortest verse in the Bible. It's 2 words: Jesus wept. And when you read this story, it almost feels like that verse doesn't fit. Jesus wept just moments before he brought Lazarus back to life. It causes us to ask the question, why would he be grieving if he knew resurrection was coming? In this passage, we get a glimpse into Jesus as a human. Jesus, who was fully God, but also fully man, had a vulnerable moment with his humanity. And in that moment, he felt the weight of the fact that in this world, there is loss. And he gave himself permission to grieve. One of the aspects of grief and loss that Pete Scazzaro, the author of our series, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, talks about is to pay attention to your grief. It's really tempting to tune it out or to focus on the idea that in the end, everything's going to be okay. But Jesus models that grief and sadness are a part of the process. Jesus knew that resurrection was coming for Lazarus, but he paid attention to the grief and sadness he was feeling, and he let himself weep. We too can benefit from paying attention to our emotions and giving ourselves permission to feel them. This summer, I'll be honest, I was kind of starting to feel the weight of the world. Everything just felt so hard and heavy. And I was hitting one of those walls that Steve talked about in his sermon last week. And I'm super privileged that I have not hardly experienced any loss in this season. And so I felt extremely guilty even to feel this way at all. There were so many people that had it so much worse. And so I powered through. I told myself my emotions aren't valid. And I tried to push through it, but it didn't work. I was still inexplicably sad and angry and frustrated. And then on top of that, I was guilty because I didn't think my emotions were valid. It wasn't until a friend and mentor of mine helped me pay attention to the grief I was feeling and gave me permission to acknowledge it. And it was then that I was able to start to work through it. Jesus has resurrection power, but that doesn't mean we can't or we shouldn't grieve our losses. It's exactly the opposite. I think it's also important to note that Jesus understands and can handle our grief. As is evident in the story with Lazarus, Jesus has experienced loss right alongside with us. Isaiah 53:3 calls Jesus a man of suffering, familiar with pain. And Jesus understands any grief or loss we might be experiencing. And he can walk with us as we learn to pay attention to it. Another aspect of grief that sometimes feels countercultural to us is waiting in the confusing in-between. We see some of this in the story with Jesus and Lazarus. There was a little bit of chaos in the in-between, as to be expected. There were accusations made about why Jesus didn't come any faster. He was making these kind of absurd promises that Lazarus would rise again, even though Lazarus had been dead for over 3 days. And at the same time, Jesus broke down and wept. The in-between makes no sense, and it feels very out of control most of the time. As Pete Scazzaro says, the confusing in-between resists all earthly categories and quick solutions. It runs contrary to our Western culture, and it requires enormous humility in that moment to wait and to not take control. It's often in the confusing in-between where our souls can grow the most. We sit in the in-between and we give ourselves time to process. We are able to identify and acknowledge our grief because we've given ourselves space to acknowledge it. And we learn to rely on God. And it's here that we embrace our limits. Now, before I talk about limits, I think that it's important to note that sometimes we need people in the in-between. We need friends, we need family, we might even need a counselor. And that's okay. And all of those people can help us acknowledge and embrace what we're going through. But it's possible that one of the greatest losses that we must grieve over and over in our lives is our limits. We live in a culture that rebels against limits with everything in us. We are constantly trying to push the edge of what we can do. I mean, tech companies today are pushing the limits of technology by finding new ways for AI to integrate into our lives, from hyper-realistic sounding voices on your Google Homes to self-driving cars. We push the limits of the human body. Right now, Nike has spent the last couple years sponsoring some of the world's fastest runners to try to break the 2-hour marathon. There's something inherent in us that wants to rebel against everything that we're told. It's like that phenomenon that happens when someone says, "Don't think about cookies." And then not only can you not stop thinking about cookies, but now you also want cookies. We consider limits to be bad and inherently wrong. But what if instead of constantly pushing against the limits all of the time, we sometimes embrace them? What if limits are actually a beautiful blessing? Limits can help us stop frantically working for more. They can help us move on and let go. Limits can teach us self-control, which is a fruit of the Spirit, which maybe isn't my favorite. But we know in a season where we are in a season where limits are in abundance. And I want you to know that it's completely valid to grieve the losses that are happening because of the limits in place. But what if instead of fighting the limits of this season, we chose to embrace them and see what God could do in and through them? I know for me, like many of you, I've grieved not spending time with people in the same way over the last several months. But I've also connected with friends that live far away way more often and in meaningful ways in this season. I've grieved the canceling of trips and plans, but I've had more time to explore nearby and spend days outside. I've had to embrace the humility of leading in unprecedented times. Leading knowing that I don't know the right answers, relying on the best information I have to make the best decisions I can by the grace of God. I think that one of the reasons why embracing limits helps us to enlarge our souls is because of the humility it gives us. Submitting ourselves to God and to others. And in a completely backwards way, embracing limits can actually set us free. It sets us free from ourselves so that we might love God and our neighbors that much more. I think it's worthwhile to note here that we always have limits. It's not something new in this season. For example, I'm not a college student anymore, and so staying up until 3 a.m. does not work the same way. I have a budget, and so I can't just spend money on whatever I want. I love to run, but I know I will never run a sub 2-hour marathon. I'm just not made like that. And I'm in seminary and I work full time, and so I have a lot of limits about how I can spend my time right now, especially because 3 a.m. does not work like it used to. We all have limits, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. But it is often a very humbling thing to accept especially in a world that tells us we can be and do whatever we set our minds to. The good news is, in humility, in grieving our losses and embracing our limits, we aren't stuck in the in-between forever. We can find hope in the truth that God will bring about resurrection and new life in his time. The raising of Lazarus, which is arguably Jesus' most profound miracle in his ministry up until this point, is a foreshadowing to Jesus' resurrection where death has no hold on him anymore. And the good news is that one day Jesus will restore all things. Even now, he is making all things new, even if we might not see it yet. Jesus is very clear that in this world there will be trouble. There will be grief and loss and limits. These losses are real. We might rather not deal with them. And they're often painful. But resurrection only comes out of death. John 12:24 says, "I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. If you let him, if you'll embrace grief and loss, God can redeem it and produce fruit from it." Would you pray with me? You, O Lord, are well acquainted with these concepts of grief and loss and limits. You lowered yourself to become human so that you might intimately know these things. You have walked in our shoes and you know our pain and grief. You know the things we have lost and the way we feel stifled by limits. And so, God, we ask that you give us the courage to lean into the in-between, to acknowledge where we are grieving, and to humbly accept where we are limited so that our souls might be enlarged by you. You are the God that can turn our mourning into dancing and turn our grief into joy. And we hold on to that promise that you are making all things new, both now and at the end of the age. Amen. With that, as the band comes back up, we are going to transition into a time of song, and this is also generally when we have our offering. We aren't passing the baskets right now, but there is a basket in the back if you would prefer to give with cash or a check, but we highly encourage you to use the app, use the link on the Facebook page, or to go to our website and give. Your support is what helps us to continue to be able to do the mission of Fusion, and so we greatly appreciate your support. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the band.
And earth is quaked before, moved by the sound of his voice. Seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken from my God. Through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you. even when my eyes can't see. And this mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. Through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and winds still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and winds still know His name. The waves and winds still know His name. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.
kind of stay put for a minute while we pass out some disinfectant wipes to help clean down the areas. We really appreciate your help with that. But as you go this week, go knowing that God goes with you in your grief, in the in-between, and in whatever else is going on in your life. Go with that grace and peace. Have a good week, everybody.
The bridge of goodness of God. Okay, got it. Clicks, Brendan, clicks.